Two catastrophic events happened in the South China Sea. First, a $70 million FA-18F Super Hornet goes down. Less than 30 minutes later, an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter from the same carrier also crashes. Both crews are rescued. The ship involved is the USS Nimitz, and immediately the entire media landscape asks the wrong question. The myth begins instantly. Was it mechanical failure? Was it pilot error? Was it the 50-year-old age of the USS Nimitz? The entire conversation, the entire investigation becomes focused on what failed. What part broke? What system failed? What was the maintenance log? As a geopolitical strategist, as a former advisor who has watched this game unfold for decades, I am telling you, today, that is the wrong question. It is a dangerous, blinding distraction. The question our 55-plus audience, our veterans, our tradesmen, and our citizens need to be asking is not what failed. The real question is why it failed. These two crashes are not an aviation safety incident. They are not a tragic, isolated case of bad luck. They are the successful outcome of a deliberate, invisible, and brilliant enemy strategy. They are a successful psychological warfare operation. Today, we are not conducting a mechanical investigation. We are conducting a strategic investigation. We are going to ignore the myth of a simple accident, and we are going to expose the truth of an invisible war. We will connect the dots that the mainstream media is missing. We will link these crashes to the angry protests from the Philippines. We will link them to the urgent warnings from Canadian and American pilots. And we will show you how China is systematically and deliberately forcing the U.S. Navy to defeat itself. This is the story of how to win a war without firing a single shot. The three warfares. China's invisible battle plan. To understand what happened to those aircraft, you must first understand the battlefield. And that battlefield is not what you think. It is not a war of missiles and bullets. It is a gray zone war. The gray zone is the undefined, murky space below the threshold of conventional, declared war. It is the space where you can commit acts of aggression so long as you maintain plausible deniability. It's a war fought with tools that don't look like weapons and soldiers who don't wear uniforms. It is a war of ambiguity. The Chinese military doctrine has a name for this. It is called the three warfares. Fact check the Heritage Foundation. This doctrine was adopted in 2003, and they have been perfecting it ever since. The three warfares are psychological warfare, media warfare, legal warfare. This is the playbook. This is the core of their entire national strategy. Let's break them down because this is exactly what is happening to the U.S. Navy. First, psychological warfare. The goal of this is not to kill the enemy. The goal is to break the enemy's mind. It is designed to disrupt decision-making, to create doubt, to create fear, to induce stress, to lower morale, and, most critically, to create systemic fatigue. It is the strategy of exhaustion. You make your opponent so tired, so stressed, and so paranoid that they begin to make mistakes. They crash their own planes. They collide their own ships. You make them defeat themselves. Second, media warfare. This is the war of narratives. The goal is to control the story, both at home and abroad. When a U.S. ship conducts a legal freedom of navigation operation, China's media warfare kicks in. They paint the U.S. as the aggressor. They call it provocation and flexing muscles. And when a U.S. plane does crash, the media warfare machine has the perfect story. This is not our fault. This is a tragic accident caused by poor American maintenance. It is proof that the U.S. military is overstretched and incompetent. They are a destabilizing force. They control the story. And third, legal warfare, or lawfare. This is the most insidious. This is where China uses and twists international law to justify its own illegal actions. They draw an imaginary 9-dash line on a map, claiming the entire South China Sea, a claim that was unanimously rejected by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in Tulina Ninja. It has no legal basis, but by constantly repeating the lie and by using their lawfare doctrine, they try to create a new fact on the ground. They use their own maritime laws to harass foreign vessels in international waters. Now combine all three. You have a strategy that harasses you psychologically, blames you for it in the media, and uses twisted legal arguments to justify the harassment. This is a suffocating 360-degree strategy. It is not a punch to the face. It is death by 1,000 cuts. The goal is not to sink the USS Nimitz. The goal is to make it so expensive, so stressful, and so politically toxic for the U.S. to be there, that America eventually bleeds itself dry, bleeds its budget, bleeds its hardware, and bleeds the morale of its people, and finally just packs up and goes home. That is how you win. And the most powerful weapon in this entire arsenal? Plausible deniability. By using forces that don't look like forces, China can always say, "It wasn't us. That was just an over-aggressive pilot acting alone. That was just a civilian fishing boat. It was a tragic accident." They rely on the West to call these accidents because it perfectly masks their aggression. The War in the Air title, the pattern harassment in the skies. So you may be asking, that's a great theory, but where is the proof? Where is the evidence that China is actually doing this? The proof is not hidden. It is documented. The media just isn't connecting the dots. Let's look at the pattern. These two crashes did not happen in a vacuum. They happened inside a systematic, high-intensity campaign of aerial harassment. This is not speculation. This is from the Pentagon. In late 2023, the U.S. Department of Defense released an astonishing report. They documented more than 180 coercive and risky intercepts by Chinese playoff jets against U.S. aircraft. These 180 incidents occurred in just 2 years, 2021, 2023. Why is that number so important? Because that 2-year total is more than the entire previous decade combined. This is not random. This is not accidental. This is a deliberate, statistical, undeniable escalation. It is a pattern. It is a policy. It is the psychological warfare part of the three warfares in action. And it's not just the United States. The original report we analyzed cited complaints from Canada. Australian pilots have reported the same thing. The goal is to terrorize all U.S. allies in the region. So what does one of these risky intercepts actually look like? This is not the professional cat-and-mouse game of the Cold War. This is something far more dangerous. A Chinese J-11 or J-16 fighter jet will approach a U.S. patrol plane like a P-8 Poseidon. It will fly within 20 feet of the American cockpit. At 500 miles per hour, that is a microsecond from collision. It is pure, reckless intimidation. They will then fly directly in front of the U.S. plane and deploy chaff. Chaff is bundles of small metallic strips, like aluminum foil. It is designed to confuse radar, but when fired directly into the path of another plane, it gets sucked into the engines. We have documented cases of U.S. planes having to shut down engines mid-flight, filled with Chinese chaff, to prevent a catastrophic failure. In other cases, they deploy flares. These are high-intensity magnesium charges, burning at thousands of degrees. They are designed to decoy heat-seeking missiles. Chinese pilots will fly under an Allied plane and fire flares upwards directly into its flight path, forcing the Allied pilot to yank the controls to avoid a disaster. This is not intercepting. This is assault. It is an act of aggression, carefully calibrated to be plausibly deniable. The Chinese pilot can always say, "It was a mistake. It was a training exercise gone wrong." The American pilot was in the wrong place. This is media warfare and legal warfare, covering for psychological warfare. Now, let's connect this back to the Nimitz. What is the strategic consequence of this campaign? It is the creation of unbearable 24/7 cognitive load. Cognitive load is the technical term for brain fatigue. Imagine you are that F-18 pilot on the USS Nimitz. You are flying what the press release calls a routine patrol, but your brain is not routine. Your brain is on high alert. Your heart rate is high. Your cortisol levels are surging. Because you know that at any second, a plaf jet could appear off your wing, ready to play a game of chicken with your life. You are burning through your finite mental reserves just existing in that airspace. You are mentally exhausted before your real mission even begins. And what is your real mission? To return to your carrier, to perform the single most difficult, most dangerous, or most precise task in all of military aviation. Landing a 30-ton jet at 150 miles per hour on a tiny pitching moving strip of steel in the middle of the ocean. A task that requires 100% of your focus. A task that has zero margin for error. But you are attempting it when your brain is already empty. Your mental fuel tank is gone, burned away by hours of state-sponsored harassment. This is how China creates accidents. They don't push the plane. They push the pilot. They push the human until the human breaks. The pattern: China's maritime militia. This campaign of exhaustion is not limited to the air. In fact, it is even more intense and more effective at sea level. This is the second part of the pattern, and it connects directly to the complaints from our allies. Just days ago, at the ASEAN-US Summit, Philippine President Marcos made an urgent public plea. He publicly condemned China's dangerous maneuvers in the South China Sea. He specifically cited the coercive use of tools against Filipino vessels. What is this coercive tool? Is it a missile? A torpedo? No, it's a water cannon. Chinese Coast Guard ships, which are larger than most Navy's destroyers, are relentlessly, week after week, using high-pressure water cannons to blast and disable Filipino supply ships. They are intentionally ramming them, injuring sailors in international waters. But even this is not the primary weapon. The most brilliant and most dangerous part of China's gray zone strategy is a force that doesn't technically exist. It is the China Maritime Militia. When you see a picture of hundreds of Chinese fishing boats swarming a Filipino reef or a U.S. warship, these are not fishing boats. Let me be clear. They are not fishermen. They have no fishing gear on board. They do not trawl for fish. They are a state-funded, state-controlled professional militia. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, tracks this fleet every single day. In their 2024 report, Dropping the Act, CSIS noted that the average number of militia vessels deployed in the South China Sea was 232 ships every single day. This is a 15% increase over 2023. This is not a fishing fleet. It is an occupation force. These ships are built with reinforced steel hulls, specifically for ramming. Their crews are military trained. They no longer even pretend to fish. The CSIS report confirms they now routinely anchor for months at a time at military bases like Mischief Reef. Dropping the Act entirely. They are, for all intents and purposes, an arm of the Chinese Navy. But they are painted blue like civilian boats. Why? Plausible deniability. This ghost fleet is used to execute two key strategies. First, the cabbage strategy. The term was coined by a Chinese general. It is their own doctrine. They surround a target, like a Filipino-held island or a U.S. destroyer, with layer after layer of ships. The first layer is the fishing boat militia. The second layer, just behind it, is the white-hulled China Coast Guard. The third layer, just over the horizon, is the gray-hulled Chinese Navy. The target is wrapped, suffocated like a cabbage. Second, the shouldering or swarming tactic. Hundreds of these militia boats will actively swarm a U.S. carrier strike group, like the one led by the USS Nimitz. They will intentionally drive in front of U.S. destroyers. They will shoulder them, bumping and scraping against their hulls. They play high-stakes games of chicken, trying to force the U.S. ship to change course. Now, what is the strategic consequence of this? It creates an escalation dilemma. It paralyzes the U.S. commander. If the captain of the USS Nimitz or its destroyer escorts collides with one of these fishing boats, what happens? China's media warfare machine goes into overdrive. U.S. nuclear warship kills innocent Chinese fishermen. It's an international incident, a public relations disaster. The U.S. is painted as the bully, the aggressor. The U.S. captain is court-martialed. America loses. But if the U.S. ship does nothing, if it swerves, if it changes course, if it backs down, then China also wins. They have tactically defeated and humiliated the most powerful navy on Earth using a fishing boat. This is the gray zone trap. The U.S. Navy is forced to operate in a mobile, hostile minefield. The entire strike group is on edge, 24/7. The captain, the officers on the bridge, the lookouts. They are not just scanning the horizon for enemy missiles. They are terrified of accidentally colliding with a $100 fishing boat that is intentionally trying to hit them. This is psychological warfare at sea. It is an environment of pure, calculated exhaustion. It was not an accident. It was a strategic success. Now let's put the two pieces of evidence together. This is the big picture the media is missing. The media reports these as three separate stories. Story 1. 2 U.S. Navy planes crash from the Nimitz, a tragic accident. Story 2. The U.S. and Canada complain about unsafe Chinese jet intercepts. Story 3. The Philippines complains about dangerous maneuvers from Chinese ships. This is the failure of modern journalism. They are not three stories. It is one story. They are three faces of the same unified, singular strategy. China's three warfares in action. They are the 1,000 cuts. So let's ask the question again. What really caused the two crashes on the USS Nimitz? It was not just a broken part. It was not just a single pilot's mistake. The root cause was a psychologically exhausted F-18 pilot who was pushed to the brink of his mental limits by a PLAF jet playing chicken with his life, the war in the air, while trying to land on a USS Nimitz that was physically surrounded and stressed by a ghost fleet of militia boats playing a high-stakes game of collision. It was a pilot under intense cognitive load, operating on a ship under intense escalation dilemma, in an environment of pure 360-degree 24/7 exhaustion. And in that environment, something had to break. The weakest link, whether it was a fatigued human or a poorly maintained part, finally snapped. This brings us to the core thesis. The spike. The twin USS Nimitz crashes are not tragic accidents. They are the successful, calculated outcome of China's gray zone warfare. This is a strategy designed to break U.S. readiness and to force American failures by waging a relentless, invisible, and brilliant war of psychological exhaustion. The planes didn't crash despite China's actions. They crashed because of them. It was a kill, achieved without firing a shot. How do you fight a war that isn't a war? The greatest threat to the United States in the South China Sea is not a future invasion. It is not a hot war. The greatest threat is the invisible war that is happening right now. The gray zone war that America is currently losing. China is winning by making the U.S. bleed itself, bleed its budgets on endless deployments, bleed its readiness by breaking its hardware, and bleed its morale by breaking its people. These crashes are the proof. They are the receipts of a successful strategy. This forces us as a nation to ask a terrifying and difficult question. A question for you in the comments. How can the United States even fight? How can we win against an enemy that never declares war, but uses gray zone tactics to make us defeat ourselves? Let me know your strategic solutions in the comments below. And the single most dangerous, most effective tool China is using in this invisible war is not their jets. It is their maritime militia, their ghost fleet of fake fishing boats. In our next video, we expose this force completely. We will show you exactly how China is using thousands of civilian-painted vessels to win the South China Sea without firing a single bullet. Click the link on your screen or in the description to watch that strategic briefing. Thank you for watching. Stay informed.